We've all heard horror stories about the lost Bastille clown car, but today I will explain that the enemy placement is actually smart and that the complaints are based on skill issues. People that rush through new areas are getting punished perfectly here. Without fighting anything, they try to find a way forward, only for them to discover that the seemingly only exit was a trap. They will then blame the game for being unfair for throwing 7 enemies at them at the same time. The normal reaction to this situation should have been to back out again and funnel them onto the bridge. By fighting everything instead of rushing, you can also open the door to nothing in peace. And after fighting this army, you get overwhelmed by your first wall in this game. The Ruined Sentinels are very challenging for new players, and are meant as a detergent. This is very reminiscent of the Bell Gargoyles in Dark Souls 1. On the path to them, you also get surprised by a huge army of enemies. You can funnel them into this hallway. And the gargoyles are your first wall where you might be stuck for several hours. This was a subtle way of Dark Souls 1 teaching the player that they are supposed to explore more and come back later. The Titanite demon here also teaches the player that they should ignore strong enemies for now and come back later when they are stronger. By first going through Darkroot Garden, the player will gain some levels, find new weapons and upgrade materials. But you are supposed to figure out on your own that you should explore more and come back stronger. Chapter 1: The Encounter. In both games, you can handle the gank easier by funneling the enemies into a tight corridor. Both encounters can quickly end up in getting staggered over and over. This teaches the player that they should not just spam R1. In DS2, the gank encounter has a little bit more depth to it. Here it is time to put several things the game already taught you earlier into practice. Lesson 1 is not rushing. If you back out again once you see the first 2 charge at you, you won't aggro the 3 on the left. Since the beginning, the game taught you not to run into unknown areas, as there could be danger ahead. Lesson 2 is making use of explosives. The game has shown you several times that you can deal with enemies by luring them to explosive barrels. There are lots of explosives here to make an encounter easier. The three on the left can already be heavily damaged before you open the door. Chapter 2, The Message. Both the gargoyles and the ruin sentinels are meant to show the player that they should explore more and come back later if they hit a wall. Both games already had one such encounter earlier, but now you've got to put this lesson into practice. The fact that the path to the ruin sentinels is blocked with a petrified statue makes it more obvious that you should come back later.
The way under is all blocked up, you see, by this god-awful statue. Heavens above! Who thought it a good idea to put it there?
So far you've seen one statue in the tutorial. It looks like an optional fight. The next statue already seems to be a lot more important, especially as Benhard is also fascinated by her.
See that statue? Gives me the willies. You stare at it for long enough, it starts to look alive. It just doesn't seem quite right. There are no craftsmen round these parts. Hey, you don't think a real live person was turned to stone, do you?
Looking in from the outside, the petrified statue in front of the ruin sentinels does not seem to block anything important. So far, you've probably seen two fragrant branches. One here in the lost Bastille. And Malentia sells one for 12,000. So you might skip that statue for now and explore the next path out of Magilla. You defeat two bosses on your way. And find another fragrant branch, so now it's 3 available branches for 3 known statues. Now you are a few levels stronger, and you are back at the Lost Bastille. The order of the bonfires suggests that this new path should be done earlier than the one you discovered first. So, when you get here you might be discouraged from going back to the tower apart bonfire. The scripted explosive barrel that should open the shortcut in Macduff does not even work every time. So now it looks like it's time for the other path first. And soon afterwards you discover the next statue. By making the ruined sentinels optional and blocking them with a petrified statue, DS2 shows the player better that they should explore more and come back later if they do get stuck on them. It teaches the players that optional side encounters will be harder, but that there's no rush to do them right away. Let's say the scripted barrel worked or you already know that you can open up the path to Macduff early. You will find the craftsman's hammer, which is very strong against the ruined sentinels. The placement of this weapon close to a strong boss that is weak to strike teaches the player that damage types matter. In both games, you can just run past the enemies to get back to the boss quickly. In DS1 it is easy to get stuck somewhere on the Runback. This can happen in DS2 as well, but that's how the game teaches you that you should pick the best, but not the shortest path. You can pull a lever in the room to the left, that looks like a shortcut to the boss. You will quickly learn that this is not the fastest way to the boss, but an easy way to get surrounded. So you try the longer path through the basement and notice that it works much better. Now you can get back safely to the boss. And attentive players might notice an even faster shortcut through the door to nothing we've opened earlier. In DS1, if you ran past all the enemies, but want a buff, heal or summon before fighting the gargoyles, all the enemies you skipped will catch up with you. The Ruined Sentinel's Runback lets you heal up in safety as the enemies do not even follow you to the fog gate. So to summarize, no, this encounter is not just mindless enemy spam. This encounter is actually a lot smarter than people give it credit for. It is a clear upgrade in many ways to a similar encounter in DS1. First, it perfectly punishes players that rush through new areas. Secondly, it provides several smarter ways to deal with it, like using the explosives that are spread throughout this area. Thirdly, it has a creative shortcut that lets you skip the encounter for subsequent runbacks, which feels rewarding to discover. Fourthly, it teaches players that they should explore more and come back later once they hit a wall, and it does this in a way that's much more obvious than it was for the gargoyles in DS1. Fifthly, it's completely optional, so players that complain how unfair it is to overwhelm new players with such a hard encounter actually have to blame themselves for not exploring more instead of repeatedly bashing their head against the same wall.